So, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Lloyd Higgins.
Okay. And then what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the 70s?
I think of leisure suits and trying to be fashionable the best way you can to keep up with the times. Disco and, the parties that occurred in the 70s. That's when I was finishing high school and it's my college years.
How were the parties?
They were wild and crazy and fun. And it was a lot of dancing.
Right.
Everybody tried to be, there was no such thing as being too cool to dance.
Mm-hmm.
That was the big thing, is to learn the dance moves. And we actually practiced dance moves before we went to the discos and to the parties, because that was big. It was, I don't know if you've ever seen footage of Soul Train.
Yeah.
But that was big in the 70s. And so we tried to be Soul Train dancers at the parties.
So were there any particular idols you had then in music or in culture or
Well, as you can probably tell, most of my idols were sports idols. And that was the decade that I first became a football fan. Started playing football in high school and college. And my favorite player back then his name was Roman Gabriel. He was a LA Rams quarterback. And I just followed his whole career.
The Rams won a game?
The Rams used to win the Western Division Championship all the time.
Wow.
But then they would have to go to Minnesota and play the Vikings in the snow,
They get
in the
destroyed.
frozen tundra. And the boys from LA didn't do too good
Right.
in the frozen tundra. So
And
we always lose a playoff game.
Do you remember any trends in clothing and music or culture as a whole?
Yeah, I grew up in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And in Texas, we used to listen to soul R&B music all the time. But the soul stations used to go off the air at about 6 o'clock. And so starting at about 6 p.m., we would turn on the top 40. So we got to know all the music in the 70s. And of course the disco music, with the Bee Gees and the Towering Inferno, all this stuff, where it's all the disco, high beat, fast dance music. And I really didn't have any special artists that I followed, but if some of the albums I'm starting to collect now that I used to have in the 70s were like Barry White and the Isley Brothers and all the R&B hits from the Motown era in the 70s.
Very cool.
The clothing, like I said, everybody had a leisure suit.
Right.
So those one-piece leisure suits were you dress up in to go dancing.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, my sister sent me one of those pictures from the 70s, and I was like,
Did you have a fro?
I did. Well, that's
God.
as big as I ever got, though. I never had a huge fro because I played football and the helmet didn't work that well, with the big afro. But I had a medium-sized afro. So.
And how did the civil rights movement progress into the 70s?
Well, I grew up in Texas, as I said, but then when I was in 9th grade, we moved to Los Angeles, and that's how I became an LA Rams fan. And really, where we lived, the part of LA was totally integrated.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really experience any of the segregation that was going on. That during that time there was the Watts riots,
Right.
where a lot of social unrest was taking place during that time. I was pretty fortunate. My dad was a professor at UCLA,
Mm-hmm.
so we kind of had a different lifestyle.
Right.
My whole, from kindergarten on up, we were college bound, that type of kid.
Yeah.
So, and our neighbors across the street were white family, and our whole area was just totally integrated.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going, really? Are they having problems? And we never had to experience.
Did you hear
that.
about it on the radio, though?
In fact, one of the nights that the Watch riots were going on, my friends and I got on our roof, and we can actually see the fires
Oh, wow.
that were going on in Watts. So that's how close we were located.
Mm-hmm.
Our house was probably about, I would say, 20 or 30 blocks from the LA Coliseum, where the LA Rams played. And in fact, we used to ride our bicycles because we never could get in the games, but we were close enough
Right.
to hear the roar, and we'd listen to the radio on the transistor and see what was going on. And the games weren't on TV back then either. So that was kind of a different day and age. But it was, I had a very, very middle class upbringing. It was none of the racial tension was part of my upbringing. So I consider myself to be very fortunate to be in that situation. And we were right there on the cusp of all that unrest, though, because there was a lot of things happening around us that we didn't have to fear.
Got it.
So, cool.
And you were involved in politics and keeping.
Yeah, I was very much involved in politics and trying to, make things better for the society around me. I was always involved in school, council, and I was one of the royal ambassadors. We had a church group that went around to other communities. In fact, we went to other states, like in Kansas and in Chicago, to do some reach out, and that was all during my high school years. So.
Did it affect people's mindset at all, Watergate and all the
You know,
assassinations?
I don't think the Watergate affected us as much, because it was Nixon,
Right.
and we were staunch Democrats
Right.
at the time, so we're going, okay,
Yeah, sucks for you.
move on.
Yeah, I like it.
So it didn't really affect us as much, but when you're growing up in a Democratic household, everything was, political, sides, and that's really what I've grown up to dislike about America, is that it's so divided by your political parties. And I have really close friends that are Republicans that are just thinking that America is going to hell in a handbasket. So I'm going,
And then some Republican president will get elected, and all the Democrats.
Then the Democrats will go, we have. And I always contend, and it's probably not true, but I always contended that if you're really, really well off, you want a Republican office. And if you're really, really poor, you want a Democrat office. But if you're part of that 80% that's in the middle that has to work and pay taxes and do all the things they're supposed to do anyway, it really doesn't matter who's the president, because you still have to do all those things.
They're all the same.
You don't get you're not getting great benefits for being rich and not having to pay taxes. And you're not getting any benefits because you're poor and needing the government to pay for your lifestyle.
Right.
You're in the middle, just working and paying your taxes and doing the things trying to make us, America a good society. So that's probably, that's my viewpoint anyway. It's probably not true. I'm sure the middle America cares about who the president is, but it hasn't affected me directly, who the president was, because I knew that I was going to get my education. I knew I was going to go to college. I knew I was going to get a job and I have to work. I knew I wasn't going to be rich, but I knew I wasn't going to be poor.
So we're also wondering how new technology in the 1970s impacted your life with computers and the Walkman or something, being introduced.
Very little.
Very little.
Yeah, the Walkmans were this big.
Yeah.
And we was carried on my shoulder, and so technology wasn't a big part of growing up in my school life. I go back to TCU. That's where I went to school, Texas Christian University, and our student center. In fact, it's been torn down. But in the old days, there were phones. Literally, phones everywhere, because people would go to the student center and call home, or they would call their friends to come pick them up or whatever. There was no cell phones. There was no computers to speak of. There was, when I was getting my master's degree, I remember typing up my theses on a typewriter with a whiteout. I don't know if you guys know what that is.
Yeah.
But if you type the and put an I instead of an E, then you backed up the paper, you white out the I, and then you go back and put an E in.
Yeah.
That's technology back then. And then they got to be electric typewriters. So they used to back it up and fix it for, they had a ribbon to make the mistakes. So I ended up paying someone to type my theses. I would turn in my self-typed theses. But that was technology. There was none. We didn't have the use of computers or cell phones or ATMs. That stuff didn't exist. I remember on Fridays, if we're not at the bank before it closed, you don't get any money until Monday. You're out of money.
Right.
You didn't get there in time. So the bank closed. There was no ATM cards.
Right.
There was none of that going on back in the 70s. So it was totally changed now. In fact, my major was radio, TV, and film, and we used to physically had to go buy film. We'd shoot our productions, and then we'd go back and get it processed, like Walgreens or whatever the neighborhood drugstores were, and you get it back and you figure, oh, that didn't come out. So you go out and go buy more film, and then you had to go shoot the scenes over that didn't come out. They were overexposed or underexposed or whatever. So it's totally different now with the video and productions and, movie maker and all those things that people have now. It's just amazing.
So you were kind of in the educational system during that space push, the science push, engineering. So did you kind of see anything change, or did you feel a need to compete with other countries?
I think back in that time it was the rush to get to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Remember
Right.
in 1969 was when when Americans first walked on the moon. That was really the push. It was President Kennedy's goal to be on the moon before the end of the decade.
Right.
And so they
69.
met that goal before the end of the 60s. And that was really the big push, was the great frontier, not so much, global competing
Right.
with other countries. They wanted to go to the moon.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Didn't affect me a lot.
So, yeah.
So it was out there,
Got
but
it.
it just wasn't something that was directly influenced my direction in life.
Mm-hmm.
It really didn't.
And so, what was it like being an athlete in the 1970s? Would you say?
It was crazy and great and fun and hard. They didn't know a lot about nutrition or stretching properly or getting you out of games when you were injured. You played because you
Right.
wanted to play.
Gatorade was
And-
still in glass bottles.
Well, no, they mixed the Gatorade. But the biggest difference between athletics now and athletics back in the 70s was that people hurt themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I have friends that are my age now, 59, 60 years old, they can't walk because they wanted to be out there playing football. And they're having, brain issues because of concussions. So it just really was a different day and age for athletics. Loved it and wouldn't trade it for the world, but it wasn't very safe back then. And I had a quick opportunity to become a professional athlete with the Oakland Raiders, and that didn't work out. And I was disappointed when it happened, but I'm happy that it didn't, because I have friends of mine that can't walk right now because of their going through that process. And when they were very, very young men, and now they're older men and they can't function. So.
And so, tell us a story that captures the spirit of the 70s.
The spirit of the 70s, the bigger your car was, the better off you were.
Right.
So I had a vehicle I had a 72 Impala in college,
Mm-hmm.
and that thing was a tank. It was huge. Thankfully at that time, the gas was only like 33 cents a gallon.
Right.
I think the highest I ever got when I was in college was like 36 cents a gallon.
And everyone
So,
freaked out. Like,
yeah, like really, I'm not paying 40 cents a gallon for gas.
Yeah.
That's when it started going up a little bit higher. But big cars, everybody kept their cars clean. That was one of the pride that you have about, owning a vehicle when you got to college, especially. Parties
Yeah.
were big in the 70s. That's just your lifestyle. At the weekends, you go to dances or parties, or they would have parties at TCU, would have dances on Friday nights, whatever, in the student center, they have the DJ, and
Right.
that was part of the 70s life.